Up until I was 14, I had a fear of clowns. It all started when I was 5, during a break on a cold Tuesday night in November. My parents were out of town, and my brother and sister were gone for the night. My friend, who I'll call B, wanted to come over so we could walk to the fair a couple of blocks away. We headed over to the fair, which was set up in a mostly empty parking lot. We played a few carnival games and were having a good time, until we ran into a clown. He didn't say anything, just smiled, gestured, and moved in that exaggerated way clowns do, almost like a mime. He kept inching closer to us, a little more each time. B and I laughed it off, and B even patted the clown on the shoulder as we walked away. "That was weird," I said to B. "More creepy than weird," he replied. On our walk back home, the streets were quiet and empty, but we kept hearing footsteps behind us. Every time we looked back, no one was there. After a few minutes of this, B got freaked out and was ready to head home, but I convinced him to stay. To be honest, I didn't want to be alone. We were sure someone was following us. We finally reached my house, and I fumbled with my keychain, trying to find the right key in the dark. That's when B nudged me and whispered to look behind us. There, hiding in the neighbor's bushes, was the same clown, staring directly at us. The moment he realized we saw him, he stepped out of the bushes and started coming toward us. My hand shook as I tried each of the keys until the door finally unlocked. We rushed inside and slammed the door behind us. I called my parents, who told us to lock up and hide. B and I ran upstairs to my little brother's room, which had a window facing the driveway. Peeking out from behind the blinds, we saw the clown standing in the driveway, staring up at us like he was waiting. I quickly closed the blinds, and we ducked down, trying to stay as quiet as possible. After about 10 minutes he was gone, or at least we think he was. For all we knew, he might have hidden somewhere nearby all night. Story 2. This all happened when I was 12. Old enough to sense when something wasn't right but still young enough to attract a certain kind of creep. Our neighborhood was fairly busy, but our street ended in a dead end by a forest preserve. Across from us was a sump, and through the trees was a small community park. One Saturday night, a small carnival was set up in that park. With nothing else going on, my mom suggested I check it out. She wasn't one of those moms who kept strict curfews. She trusted me to make my own choices. So, I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. I crossed through the forest, the beam from my flashlight lighting up the path, and eventually reached the park. Carnival rides lit up the darkness. A Ferris wheel, a small roller coaster, spinning rides, game booths, and food stands. It was late, so the crowds were thin. Near the edge of the park stood a big, red and white striped tent. I peeked inside and saw a small audience seated in rows, watching 3 clowns performing on a stage. One rode a tricycle, another juggled, and a third danced around. Then, the dancing clown noticed me. He skipped over and started motioning for me to come closer, maybe even up onto the stage. I didn't want to do either, so I walked away. Later, I ran into a friend and hung out with him for about half an hour. By then, the carnival was winding down, and people were starting to leave. I said goodbye to my friend and headed back toward the woods. Near the fence, I heard a faint "Psst" from behind me. I turned and saw one of the clowns, the one who had waved me over earlier. He asked if I wanted to see the backstage of the circus tent, where they kept things hidden from the guests. I quickly said no and turned toward the forest, glancing over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following. He wasn't, just stood there watching, his painted smile making the whole thing even creepier. When I was out of sight, I broke into a run. It was a half-mile walk through the woods, and I was almost home when I heard it again. Psst. This time, it was close enough to make my stomach drop. I turned and saw the same clown, stepping out of the dark into my flashlight's beam. When he got close enough, I threw the flashlight at him and sprinted toward home. I could hear his footsteps behind me until I reached the road, then nothing. When I finally burst into the house, I was breathing like I just run a marathon. My mom asked if I was okay, but I just told her I jogged the whole way home. After that, I never brought it up again. Story 3. If you've been following the news, you've probably heard about clowns luring kids into the woods. I was one of the first to go through this, and it was terrifying. Right now, I'd like to stay anonymous, just in case the clown is still out there. Here's what happened. I'm 14 and live in a tiny town in South Carolina. with a population of around 130. At the end of summer, I had a job at the local lumber yard. It wasn't glamorous, but I stayed fit from loading lumber into people's cars, and it was only a mile from my house. Most days I walked to and from work. It was a typical day, busy and tiring. I clocked out around 9:30 p.m. and started my walk home. The moon had risen, lighting up the freshly paved road, and the sounds of crickets and frogs were loud in the night. My usual route took me along a narrow road with thick forest lining each side. I always wore my earbuds, zoning out to my music on the way home. Halfway there though, I thought I heard a strange, high-pitched laugh mixed into my music. I stopped, pulled out my earbuds, and listened. The forest was so loud with frogs that I convinced myself I'd imagined it, and continued home. The next day, I headed to work around 1:30 p.m. kicking rocks along the road like always. I kicked one rock that stopped beside something odd, a bright red, squeaky clown nose. I picked it up, laughing to myself, and brought it to work. It got some laughs from my coworkers too, and I even tried it on for a joke. That night, around 9:30, I began my walk home again. This time, I'd forgotten my earbuds, so it was just me and the quiet. About halfway back, I noticed something up ahead on the road. In the fog, with the moonlight behind it, I thought I saw a deer, but as I got closer, the shape scurried off into the woods. I was passing the spot where I'd seen the deer, when I suddenly heard footsteps, only about 20 yards behind me. Turning around, I saw a clown in the middle of the road. His clothes were dirty and baggy, and his face paint was smeared, making his eyes look dark and hollow. With a small, twisted smile, he tilted his head and said, "You have something of mine. I need it back." I took a step back, confused, and said, "I don't have anything of yours." He stared at me with that smeared smile, then said, "Well then, if you don't have my nose, I'll just have to take yours." He laughed, and pulled something from behind his back. It looked like a machete. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I could hear his footsteps gaining on me, the scrape of his machete dragging along the pavement. Every few seconds he'd let out a giggle that sent my heart racing even faster. My lungs were burning, and I was close to giving up hope when headlights suddenly appeared over the hill. A truck was coming. The clown stopped in his tracks, and I turned to see that he had vanished into the shadows of the trees. I waved down the truck, panicked, and the driver called the police. I've never walked that road again. Since that night, I've learned that I'm not alone. There have been other sightings of clowns lurking in the woods, stalking people. Is this a cult? Some group of twisted clowns with a goal to terrify? I don't know, but I do know I'll never feel safe in the dark, and I'll never see clowns the same way again.